Hello everyone and welcome to the first IQA Gameplay Department Referee Training, hosted this week by myself, Steve Cockram. I'm the IQA Gameplay Department Deputy Director, and I'm joined by Michael Clark-Polner, the Rulebook Manager for the IQA as well. So the way the training is going to run is we have a presentation of the first half of the rule changes, so we're going to split this over two sessions. First session will be this week, which will cover sections 1 to 4, and then the week after, we will cover sections 5 through to 10. So the way it'll work, I'm going to present, we'll look at sections of the rulebook that have changed, extra guidance that we can give you, handy little flowcharts for certain scenarios. And any questions that you have, please put them in the live chat. MCP will answer some of the questions in the live chat, and if there's anything that keeps getting repeated or anything big that comes up, then we'll get MCP's voiceover to give us some extra guidance and answer the burning questions on your minds. If you're watching this as a video rather than a live stream, don't worry. If you've still got questions, we'll be doing a Q&A live stream some point next week. We haven't confirmed the date yet. Depends on our availability. So please come along to that, or feel free to fill out a question on a form that we'll release after this stream goes to video. Yeah, so don't panic if this is a video. If you can't catch us every live stream we do, absolutely fine. Like I say, watch it as a pre-recorded video, enter your code that we'll give you at some point throughout the presentation onto the registration form, which is in the description below. And the Q&As are not mandatory, they're just there for extra learning if you have a question. And we'll answer those that come through on a form, and we'll also answer live questions from people that want to turn up to the Q&A sessions. So, without further ado, let's crack on with the rule changes for sections 1 to 4. I'm going to apologise first of all. I have the presentation on this side of me and the camera's there. So if I'm not looking at you, I'm still talking to you, don't worry. So, the first section that we come across in the rulebook comes under 121, which is rosters. So the rulebook says a team must be able to field a legal set of 7 eligible players to begin or continue a game, including during the seeker floor. So this is all the way up until a snitch catch has been made. During overtime, because the seekers and snitch now get removed, a team may continue the game if they are able to field a legal set of 6 eligible players, because the seekers are no longer needed. If at any point in those two scenarios they're at the bare minimum and a player's injury will cause their team to forfeit under this rule, you need to go to the on-site medical staff to get their opinion on how long they think it's going to take to have the player fit, ready to play again. If they believe it's going to be a minute or less, then the game waits and resume when they're ready. Head referees, timekeepers, don't time the minute. If it's obviously more than a minute, like noticeably more than a minute or two, go over, try and get a reassessment if they don't look like they're going to be resuming anytime soon, and then follow that same procedure again. If they say a minute or less, then wait. If not, then you have to declare forfeit, which comes under the extra guidance. And the second bit of extra guidance is if somebody is injured during the stoppage for the snitch catch and the game does go to overtime, obviously that 7th player who's now injured can remain sitting out. You don't have to pause the game any longer, because the game can continue with their remaining 6 players, regardless of the treatment time. So, the next section is just underneath. This is just a little clarification for people under positions, is that keepers have been redefined as specialized chasers. This means that in the sections, so for example contact, where it doesn't matter what type of quaffle player it is, the terms can be simplified to chasers instead of having a massive long sentence where it says something like chasers and keepers in regards to one another. So this only affects the wording in the rulebook. This does not affect how the game is played at all. So that's just a small thing. So on to one of the bigger sections now, which is the field lines and marks. So the pitch shape still remains the same on the outside, and now we have renamed some of the lines. So the line on the opposite side of the score table is the starting sideline, which we'll go over under the starting procedure a bit later on. And the sideline where the score table is now the scorekeeper's sideline. And the extra mark that you see in the middle of there now is the only mark that needs to be marked on the centre line of the pitch now, which is the quaffle runner starting line, which again will come into use when we go over the starting procedure. There's also 2 optional lines that you can make on the outside of the pitch, which is the starting runner zone. So people who aren't designated runners are not allowed to line up within those sections within the midline. They have to line up outside of that section. And these are the new ball marks. So to begin a game now, 1 bludger is placed on each keeper zone line in the centre. 1 is placed on the quaffle runner starting line, and the quaffle is placed on the midpoint of the pitch. And the penalty boxes, I had to move the pitch up slightly so you can see the penalty boxes have now been shortened widthways, so they're now 1.5 meters smaller on the scorekeeper line. So I'm very sorry if you get carded this year or this cycle. You've got further to run back to those hoops. So moving on with the equipment, the hoops and the brooms. There's nothing much changed with hoops. It's just a case of now that there are a tolerance for how tall the hoops can be from floor to bottom of hoop. So instead of being a set 91 for the small hoop, it's now 89 to 93, sorry. So each hoop is as high as it was before, but with a 2 centimeter tolerance either side. Brooms are now a lot at the higher end of the tolerance of what we had before, so they're now 1 meter plus or minus 2 centimeters, and the diameter, the outer diameter of the broom, must be between 2.5 and 3.5 centimeters. But if you have end caps, it can be slightly wider to accommodate the end cap. So the tube can still be 3.5 centimeters wide, but if the end caps make it slightly bigger, say up to 4 centimeters, that's absolutely fine. One thing to note for the brooms is if you're buying PVC pipe from a shop to make a broom, ignore the numbers on the pipes for listed size. Measure it and then by that learn to eyeball it. Like for example in America, a 1/4 inch pipe is ever so slightly 3/4 inch pipe, sorry, is just too long, but when you measure it, it is within our tolerances. So I say measure it and learn to eyeball it. So there's also a change on the tape allowance now. What you can do with your broom. So you're allowed 1 section up to 20% of your broom covered in tape. You cannot have this 20 centimeter section split over 2 smaller sections or more, and you also cannot now have tape going all the way up and down the broom. However though, if you have end caps made of tape, so if you tape over the end because you can't have a hollow end on the broom, then that doesn't count towards your tape allowance. So if you have to put a little bit of tape on the end, it doesn't count towards that 20%. Moving on to hats. So an addition this, so 255F, the rulebook says that hats with 1 or more horizontal stripes in any of the 4 positional headband colours may not be worn, even if the stripe is covered by the headband. So if anyone now has a hat with a stripe that goes that way, which is the same way a headband would go, it cannot be a stripe that is green, white, black, or yellow, or potentially confused with any of those colours. And the guidance we would give is try and catch this before the player affects play. Now normally if you're doing an equipment check, you should get everyone to bring all of the equipment they intend to use for the game to that check. So you should be able to tell them yes or no then, but if they spur of the moment want to put it on during the game, then make sure you try and catch it nice and early. That way you can tell them to take it off and apply no harm, no foul, which will overall benefit that player. So if they do have a go, you say, well, I'm saving you a card. Bit of a change with jewellery. So 2510, the rulebook now says for forbidden equipment, if a player's jewellery has not affected play, the player shall receive the penalty for wearing forbidden jewellery, which is an ejection, instead of wearing forbidden jewellery equipment, which is a red card penalty. So to explain this difference, if they interfere with play, such as go and make a tackle or catch a ball, and the jewellery does not affect the play, so if I go and make a tackle and I've got a necklace on or a ring on, and I don't cause an injury or pop the ball, then it's an ejection because I haven't affected another player or the equipment, so I haven't affected the play. Whereas if they do interfere with play and say, like, I've got a ring on and it pops the ball that I catch, or my necklace scratches another player, then it will be a red card because you have directly impacted another player or the equipment. And once again, try and catch this before the player interferes with play at all. That way you can tell them to take it off and apply no harm, no foul, which will definitely more benefit the player in this situation. So, we now move on to the coin toss, which is the start of the new start procedure. So this bit is one of the longer bits of this session. So a coin toss is now mandatory for every single match. It's not when the captains just request it. So at the start of every single match, at the end of the pre-game meeting, the head referee must accommodate a coin toss. And it's still called in the air by the captain of the team who travelled furthest. So that bit hasn't changed. And now there are 3 choices to be made. Which team will defend which end? Which team's quaffle runner will pick their starting position first? And which team's bludger runner will pick their starting position first? The team who picks first will only get one of those 3 choices, and the other team will get to choose their preference for the remaining 2 options. However, the team who wins the toss can defer the first option to the other captain so that they get to pick the remaining 2. So, for example, if MCP and I were playing against each other and I won the toss, I might want to pick which end my team will defend because of where the sun is or the wind's blowing. When I pick that, MCP's bludger and quaffle runners get to pick their starting position first. Or if I really wanted to have my strongly right-handed quaffle runner pick a particular side, I might pick that first, and then MCP will get to pick which end the team will defend and where the bludger runner starts. However, they do not have to be chosen in that order listed. So whoever's making the first choice gets any of those 3 choices, and then the other speaking captain gets the other 2. So the new starting procedure. That is how the balls will be set up. I've extended the starting runner zone into the pitch just for visualization. So to begin with, the 2 quaffle runners line up. So these are the 2 designated quaffle runners. They line up on the quaffle runner starting line, and at the start of the game they will run obviously towards the quaffle. Now, obviously under the coin toss, you can pick which side. The person who is responsible for picking first will get to pick first. Now, just because orange team are defending the left side hoops here, orange quaffle runner can still line up on the other side of the pitch. Likewise with purple. If purple gets to pick first, they can choose to be on the other side of the pitch if they want to. And then the bludger runners line up, which same again, if the orange beater wants to line up on the other side of the pitch, that's absolutely fine. So once the 2 sets of designated runners are in place, each team must send an opposing chaser to start in the opposing team's half. However, their restriction is as well as the starting runner zone, they cannot line up within 1.5 meters of the midline. The keeper zone lines. So in this situation here, purple has opted for a slightly more attacking position and orange a more conservative position. And then everybody else will just slot in around it. Now I know I've got 4 white headbands for each team. But again, this ties in with the whole keeper thing. If any of those could be a keeper, because it doesn't matter which way around. So, how do we know when people have picked their starting position? So we now call them locked-in players when they're ready to go. And this is just an overview of the Brooms procedure in terms of wording. So, a player chooses their starting location by placing their broom on the ground of that location as a marker. Once that location has been set, it's then a locked-in player violation for the player to move the broom, leave the vicinity of the broom without asking and getting permission from a referee. They can't change their headband, and they can't change with another player unless they are injured or ejected. And in which case that penalty would only be assessed against the original player. So the person coming in, they would not get the penalty for. So the extra guidance is that most of the time you can referee this as no harm, no foul, unless it's causing or going to cause problems. So, for example, if the defensive team are lining up before the offensive chaser, because the offensive chaser should have first pick on where they go, then the defensive team, you should allow to pick up the broom and move across so that the offensive player can choose where they want. The false start stipulations still remain the same. So if a player lifts their broom off the ground and does reset it before broom's up, then they can continue absolutely fine. But if they lift it up and they do not reset it before broom's up, they false started, blue card. If they touch the ground in front of the line with their body before broom's up, then they've also false started whether or not they reset or not. And I believe MCP has a little bit of further guidance when it comes to locked in players and the broom's up procedure.
Yes, as I recall, I was going to talk about the order. I think you touched on it a bit with the defensive players lining up first. We don't want this to necessarily become an overburdened procedure. You can just let people line up, especially those people outside of the starting runner zone. The defensive players can take up provisionary positions. They can pick their places. Just know that because the offensive player locks in first, that offensive zone chaser gets priority. So if they want to go somewhere someone else already is, the defensive player will need to move. But don't feel like you have to stop the defensive players from walking up to the line until the offensive player has taken their position. Most of the time, this is probably going to go pretty smoothly. People are just going to go to the line. You may want to work with teams the first few times, but once they get the hang of what the idea is, if there's not a problem, don't make it one. If people are lining up just fine and no one's having any issues, and this positioning is all legal, then you're all good.
Cool. So yeah, MCP session is, so to begin with, we do recommend that you start following that step-by-step procedure that I went over by lining up the quaffle runners first, and then the bludger runners, and then the opposition half chasers, and then everybody else, just to ensure that it gets done correctly and you get used to it. But there is no obligation to do it that way. The only person that does get the priority, so I've said they must line up first, but it just means they get priority, is the chase line up in the opposition half. But once they're in place, everybody else can just line up before the designated runners have locked themselves in. Again,
the other thing to be aware of is, again, order is not too important, but something that people do sometimes miss on the center players, the designated runners. Make sure they are at least half a meter away from the midline. But once they pick their side, the other person can start lining up, because there's no way they could interfere with each other. If one person picks the left side of the line, the other player can start lining up on the right before the person on the left fully takes their position, because they know where they're going to be.
Yeah. So the main problem that we'll envisage you encountering is the problem that we touched on before about the opposition chaser wanting to line up in a particular space. But with locked-in player violations, if somebody locks themselves in, and then the other team want to respond to that by, oh, actually, even though I've locked myself in, I want to move so I can get a more advantageous position. So that would then deem to be cause a problem. So at that point, you'd start to look at penalties. But again, try and play no harm, no foul wherever you can. So the next point we go on to is outside of everybody else, so the designated runners and the contested balls, the people in that starting runner zone. So what can the designated runners do? So they can attempt to possess their assigned ball whilst it still remains contested. They can take possession of their assigned ball whilst it remains contested. They also have the right to leave the vicinity of the midline without actually contesting their ball at all. So even if you're a designated runner for the quaffle, you can just go straight back to your hoops and defend if you really want to. You can also be replaced by another player on the start line if you commit a false start as a designated runner. Nobody else has that privilege, so if you're the designated runner for a ball and you commit a false start, then the speaking captain may replace you with somebody else on that line. They can... Yeah, MCP is going to give a little bit more on that.
Just one quick. They replace you with one of the other starting players. You do not get replaced from the bench. You still end up playing the starting runner that false started still goes to the penalty box, but one of the other chasers or the other beater, if it's a beater, can move despite having previously locked in to the starting runner line to replace them. But say your offensive zone chaser commits a false start, you're just going to lose your offensive zone chaser.
Yeah, so nice little clarification. They can also line up in the opposition half of the field on their relative starting line. So like I said before on the diagram, if you're a designated runner, you're not limited to lining up on your own side of the field, even though there is already an opposition chaser in the other half. So now let's look at what they cannot do. So they cannot push each other at all, and they cannot slide or dive to the quaffle. It's specifically prohibited, even if it would be otherwise legal in play. So the situation where a ball's rolling away and people are running side by side and they both try and dive onto it, normally in otherwise legal play that would be legal to a certain extent, whereas now, because it's specifically prohibited, they cannot do that in this scenario. So if they do it in a manner where it is otherwise legal, then the penalty is a blue card, not a full contact yellow card. But if they do commit a contact foul that is normally punishable by a yellow, then it still remains a yellow card. So if one of them pushes the other one from behind, or they tackle them off the ball or something like that, it still remains a yellow. And they also cannot line up within half a meter of the midline, which is measured from the inside shoulder. So if the midline is on my right side here, the measurement starts from the midline to the edge of my shoulder on that side. So the rulebook says a player ceases or stops to be a designated runner when any of the following occur. So if their assigned ball has been touched, if they leave the vicinity of the midline, they lose that right to become a designated runner. If they get knocked out, they have a penalty assessed against them, or their assigned ball is turned over. Excuse me. And with the extra guidance, when both the designated runners stop being designated runners for those reasons above, so if both designated runners for a ball have meet one of those 5 criterion, then the ball can be touched by somebody else. But if you feel it's not obvious to other players that the ball is now uncontested, then you should call the ball free. So if you're going to be penalising someone, one of the designated runners, and the other players might not know, and they're the only one left attached to the ball, then you can then call the ball free, like quaffle free, bludger free, so that everybody knows that they can go for it. The likelihood is that 99% of the time the ball will obviously be free, as it will be touched by one of the runners. If there is only one designated runner left attached to a ball, so if, say, with purple v green, if the purple runner slips and they think, I'm never going to get this, so they run back to their own hoops, and green's the only one left to go for the quaffle, it still remains technically contested. It's still classed as contested. So nobody else can touch it until green does, or they stop becoming a designated runner themselves. Non-designated runners, everybody else. Just touching on that last section. If that does happen, where there is only one designated runner attached to the ball, you need to be, the quaffle, you need to be a lot sharper with your call of delay of game, because they're the only one that can possibly possess that ball. They are then dictating the pace of the game. If you feel like they're taking it too slowly or delaying, then that case would be a bit of a stricter example of where you can call delay of game against where you can call it in other cases. So, non-designated runners, so everybody else, what can they do? They can cross the starting zone straight away off Brooms up. So on that diagram, if there's somebody lined up right next to the starting zone, they can run straight into it if they want to. However, they cannot contact, block, or make any form of interference with a runner. So the beaters will be on that starting line, so if a chaser decides to cut in and try and run across, then the likelihood is they're going to cause interference with a runner, which means they'll get penalised with a yellow card. from the starting line, they can initiate otherwise legal contact from the call of Brooms up, so they can legally, otherwise legally push, they can grapple, they can stiff arm, unlike the designated runners can. However, what can they not do? They basically can't do what the designated runners can do with a bit more. So they can't attempt to possess their assigned ball while it remains contested, and they can't be replaced by another player on their starting line if they commit a false start. They can't interfere with the designated runners in any way, which would be a yellow card penalty rather than a blue for designated runner versus designated runner. Contact fouls that would be otherwise legal. They cannot touch a ball, which is still deemed contested, so if they do that, it's a blue card penalty. And they cannot line up within 1 meter of the opposition player, shoulder to shoulder. So if I've got somebody on this side of me again, it'll be measured from this side of my shoulder versus this side of their shoulder. So that's everything to do with the starting procedure, I hope. So hopefully that's cleared what seems to be quite a big section up for you. So now we're going to go on to one of my wonderfully graphicked flowcharts. So there's been a bit of a tightening up and clarification on what happens to loose balls at a stoppage. So what happens to an already propelled ball at a stoppage, provided that it's not going to move due to another rule? So if it's scored, obviously then it would normally go back to the keeper. If it has a turnover attached to it, it's going to move anyway. So if it's not going to move due to another rule, what happens? So the first question you need to ask yourself is, did the ball touch anything, which includes players, equipment, or the ground, or did it score before the whistle? So if not, you need to ask, is the player who propelled it eligible to receive the ball? So are they adjudicated a penalty against themselves? Were they beat between throwing it and the stoppage of play? If yes, so they're not beat, they can receive the ball again because they've not picked up another one straight away. The ball gets returned to the player who propelled it, which happens a lot of the time. I haven't seen it very often at all where a player throws it, the whistle's gone, and they're now no longer eligible. But it can happen, so we need to tell you about it. If not, it goes across to the same question that you need to then ask yourself if the ball did touch something before the whistle, which is, did the ball become out of bounds? If it did it become out of bounds before the whistle? If not, it gets placed 2 meters inbound from where it crossed the boundary line. So there's quite a few questions here to simplify it. So the player's thrown it. It's I think I've got that. Is that the right way around or the wrong way around? No, that's the right way around. So the player's thrown it. It's touched the floor, and it's gone out of bounds, and then the whistle has gone. Is that right? I've confused myself now. I've confused myself with my own diagram. Did the ball come out before the whistle? I've even confused MCP trying to give me advice, and I've completely. So the ball comes out of bounds. The ball comes out of bounds before the whistle. So no, it's after the whistle. Right, okay. So this would be a case of it's thrown, it's touched something, and then the whistle's gone, and then it's rolled out of bounds afterwards. My apologies. So in that case, it gets placed 2 meters inbounds from where it crossed the boundary line, and it doesn't need to be inbounded by a player. If it does go out of bounds before the whistle, then the designated player moves to the inbounding point during the stoppage. So in that case, it's thrown, it's touched something, it's also gone out, it goes out of bounds, and then the whistle gets blown. So during that stoppage, you pick the designated player who's going to go and get it, so the nearest eligible beater or the correct inbounding quaffle player, and they move to where they're going to be inbounding the ball from the resumption of play. So now we're going to move on to, it did touch something, but the ball did not become out of bounds, so it's remained in play. Did the ball move again after coming to rest? If not, it gets left where it is. But if it does, it gets put back to where it initially came to rest. So in this situation, the ball's thrown, it has touched something such as the floor or another player, it's not become out of bounds, it's still in play, you just leave it where it is. If it comes to a rest and then the wind blows it away, that point you go and get it and bring it back. So hopefully, even though I managed to confuse myself with that, that should hopefully clear up situations of where balls should be going if they're loose at a stoppage. Another change in this is a clarification, then it moves into a change, which is contact at a stoppage in play. So this is where two players are both stood up and they're in contact with each other, so one player is tackling another player and there's a stoppage in play. So the rulebook says players who were in legal contact with another at the time of the stoppage may resume that contact as long as both players were in a standing position when play was stopped. So again, as I've described, one player is tackling another player, they're both stood up, and then the whistle goes. So the guidance on this would be ensure that the contact on the resumption of play is as similar as possible, which includes the type of contact they were doing and the location of that contact. So if they were pushing at the chest when the stoppage was made, they must resume pushing at the chest. They can't then turn it into a rap at the chest or a push at the torso or something like that. Or if they were wrapping around the midriff, they then can't turn it into a push, and they also then can't wrap somewhere else. So if they do want to resume the contact at the resumption of play, they need to make sure it's the same contact and in the same location. So this moves into the change, which is the scenario where a player has a ball carrier wrapped on the floor, they're not going anywhere, and then there is a stoppage in play. So the rulebook says if a player had an opponent legally wrapped on the ground when play was stopped, they must still stand and release all contact. So the standing and releasing all contact still comes in. Once standing, the player may choose to move to any wrapped side of the player. So there are certain regulations which come under Part 3. So if they meet these criterion, then they're allowed to move to any side of the wrapped player. So both of them stand up. Once the person who was wrapped on the floor is stood up, the person who was tackling them can move around them to whichever side they want. So, however, they must remain within a meter of the opponent. They can't run off somewhere else. And it also means that the player may initiate contact with the formerly wrapped player from behind as though it was from the front if they do so immediately upon the restart of the game. So this basically means if I've tackled MTP to the floor and I've got him wrapped and we both have to stand up because there's a stoppage in play and I meet the criterion that are going to be listed in Part 3 here, I can move around him, and if once I pick my spot, if he then wants to turn around, you can't tackle me from behind now, you can now immediately tackle them from behind upon the restart. If it's not immediate, then you're subject to the normal contact rules, which means you can't do that. So this is a case of where you can now legally tackle someone from behind. So the criterion for this is in the scenario I just gave there with me tackling MTP to the floor. If he would not resume play with the possession of the ball, obviously I can't do it because he's not going to have a ball. If a penalty card or a turnover penalty, even if it is just a bludger turnover penalty for throwing after beat or something like that, if it's assessed against my team during that stoppage, I'm not allowed to move and I'm not allowed to make that contact. So MTP would have to be able to start with the ball, and none of the penalties that are cards or turnovers can be against my team. And it doesn't have to be against me personally, it just has to be against my team. I'm not allowed to have those lovely luxuries as described in 1 and 2. So again, a less complicated flowchart this time, which my brain is thanking me for. So, a player has an opponent wrapped on the ground when there is a stoppage called. What can the wrapping player legally do when the game resumes again? So the question you have to ask yourself, did the wrapping player have a grip on the ball? Because if they did, both players stand and they assume a new grip on the ball. Because they had a grip on the ball, they nullify this being able to enter contact because they are supposed to stand with a new grip on that ball. If not, will the wrap player still have possession of the ball upon the resumption of play? If not, both players stand and the wrapping player is subject to all the regular contact rules and moving during a stoppage rules upon the restart of play. So because they haven't got a ball, you can't tackle someone without a ball, so you're subject to that rule again. However, if they will, you then need to ask, was a penalty card or turnover penalty assessed against my team? Even if the other team have 3 red cards given against them and mine's just a bludger turnover for throwing after beat, I then still can't have this privilege. But if that scenario does happen and a penalty card or a turnover is assessed, it just goes back to that point before where both players stand and you don't get any of those special luxuries and all the regular contact rules apply. However, if not, that's when you get those lovely luxuries. You get to move around them as long as you're within 1 meter, and then you can immediately contact them from behind if they're facing away from you. So hopefully that clears what is quite a wordy change up a little bit for you. So
Am I good? Okay, one quick thing here is please keep in mind this is only for you have the person wrapped on the ground. This is not just any 2 players in contact on the ground. You actually have to have a legal wrap. So if you're just on top of the person, but you don't have an arm around them and you're not grabbing them, you're not going to get this. You have to have some form of wrap going when the whistle blows.
cool. Yeah. So again, another important clarification about the wrapping scenario. So now we move on to timeout. A very slight change. So the rulebook now says that the speaking captain may request a timeout at any stoppage. That remains exactly the same. However, the speaking captain may request a timeout during any lull in play during the first 17 minutes of game time. And a lull in play occurs whenever there is no active play happening on the field. So the change here is that instead of having to have it as a keeper with possession and immune in their own keeper zone, this is at any point. This can be called at any point during the game, provided that there is a lull in play. Any player can have the ball, provided it's during the first 17 minutes. And once snitch is on pitch, it then comes down to you can only call a timeout during a stoppage. The referee should. So if a speaking captain calls a timeout, you should quickly check the field for any active plays, which includes plays involving beaters or bludgers, before granting the stoppage. If there is an active play going on, then you shall deny the timeout, and if not, then you must explicitly deny the request. Don't just ignore them a player and you have to say, no, you're not having a timeout, and then continue refereeing the game. Penalty for the illegal timeout request shall only apply if the request is intentionally illegal, or the referee stops play or otherwise grants the request before realizing it was illegal. So the main point here is, say for example, the speaking captain is a defensive, currently defending as a beater, and the whole of the opposition team is running straight at you, and they think, oh no, we could get counter-attacked here, there's a lot of pressure coming onto us, quick, timeout, timeout, timeout. That's one of the specifically prohibited things, because they know it's definitely not a lull in play, and they're not making the call what we call in good faith. But if the play was stopped in error because the referee was unaware of an active play, say for example they thought they checked but there was a beater play that had just happened right behind them, if the referee thinks that the speaking captain made it in good faith, then the speaking captain will not be penalised. So if the AR comes up to you during the timeout and says, oh hey, there was an active beater play there, but it was kind of an obscure one, then you won't penalise the speaking captain even though you've granted the timeout. So the extra guidance here is that the lull in play simply means that there is nothing actively happening and no one is making or about to make a play. So generally this will mean that everybody is at walking pace with no active pressure on a ball. So everyone's walking around, there's no pressure on any of the 4 game balls, then that would be a lull in play. But if the team with the quaffle are vigorously passing the ball around, or there's somebody running up to make a tackle or something like that, or the quaffle's trying to be moved at a quick pace to move up the field. They would be examples of where they're not a lull in play, but if you are asking yourself in a game and you are unsure, then it is very likely not going to be a lull in play. A lull in play is normally very obvious for, like I say, everyone's at walking pace and there's nothing going on. There are no decisions to be made as a referee at that point. So, moving on to the second big bit of the changes, which is the end game. So if you have any questions at any point about any of these, please feel free to ask in the live chat. MCP is in there answering questions as we go along, so if you do have a question, don't be shy, please reach out and ask it. So, end game. Despite what I've seen and heard from people, it is incredibly simple. Not much to get confused about, hopefully once we've explained it at least. So what the rulebook says is, after a snitch catch has been confirmed and the catching team have been awarded 30 points, if the catching team has more points than the other team, the catching team wins. And the head referee signals the end of the game. However, if the catching team does not have more points than the other team, so if the catching team then make it a tie or they're still behind, then the game will go to overtime. So no team now can catch to lose. So the clarification I'm going to give first before the extra guidance, which is if a team is 20 points behind and they legally catch the snitch, they will be 10 points ahead when given the snitch catch points, which means they will win as they have caught and they will win from that. It doesn't matter that they're not out of 30 out of reach or anything like that. It's if they catch and they're on more points, they win. If they're not, it goes to overtime. So, extra guidance. Any scores made after the snitch catch was made but before the game is stopped does not change whether or not the game ends or proceeds to overtime. So, in an example whereby the green team is winning 100 points to 70, so 100 to 70, the team with 70 points catches the snitch, and then the currently leading team score, and then there's a Brooms down called. So there's a catch to make it 100-100, then theoretically a goal to make it 110-100. That goal does not count towards whether that game's going to go to overtime or not. I've done that the wrong way around, but it still makes sense. So, however, if that does happen where there is a catch, a goal, and then a whistle, bear in mind that goal for when we move to the overtime section. So it doesn't dictate whether it goes to overtime or not, but it can affect what happens in overtime, which I'll explain now. So, what happens if the game goes to overtime? So the Seekers and the Snitch leave the pitch, but everybody else stays where they are. So even though the Seekers and the Snitch will walk off, everybody else stays where they are and the game restarts as if there was no Seekers or Snitch on the pitch. So the target score is then calculated, announced and displayed. So how is the target score calculated? The target score is calculated by taking the non-catching team's score from regulation time and adding 30 points. So for example, if Purple were leading 90 to 60 star after regulation time, because Green have caught, they would be catching to lose, so it goes to overtime. You add 30 points onto the leading team score, which is 90. So that will give you a target score of 120. So now, this is the bit where I was saying before about the proceeding to overtime bit. Any goals legally scored between the snitch catch and the game time being stopped count towards the team's total, but not the target score. So for example, the game is Green 200 to Purple 160. Purple catch the snitch, and then the Green team score, and then Brooms down is called. Purple's catch will take it to 200 to 190 star. However, the goal by Green cannot be taken into account yet since it was after the catch. So the target score is set to 230, which is the Green's 200 points plus the 30 points for the target score. Then, because the game is proceeding to overtime, Green's goal will now count. So from the snitch catch, but before the brooms down is called, that is like a very small portion of overtime. So green's goal will now count, meaning the overtime will start with the scoreline green 210, purple 190 star, and the set score is still 230. So green only need to get 2 more goals, whereas purple will need the full 4. So once that's been sorted, the game resumes as normal, but without the seekers and the snitch. So like I say, everybody else stays where they are and they just resume on the whistle. The first team to reach the target score through quaffle points will win. And when a team reaches the target score, the head referee will stop the game, make sure that there's no penalties to be adjudicated, and then will signal the end of the game, much in the way that double overtime used to end with a goal. So, conceding during overtime. A speaking captain has the right to make a concession at any point in overtime, which I'll explain the difference at the very end, which is so only the speaking captain can make that decision, and once they've made that decision, the concession is final. They can do that straight after the snitch catch has been made, so that no overtime is actually played. They can concede the game, or even if it's 5 minutes into overtime, they can concede then, even if it's the middle of active play. If they're losing, the score remains as it is. So in those washout games where it's, say, 400 points to 10, or in this case it would be about 400 points to 40, if the team with 40 points concedes, the score will remain and end at 400 to 40 points. Whereas if the team with 400 points wants to concede, then the losing team gets given enough points to win by 10, so they would get given enough points to make them win by 410 points to 400. Now the difference this is between a forfeit would generally be something around 150 star nil, depending on the event policy or the NGB policy, whereas this is a set score line based on the current game score or what the losing team would need to make the game score correct with the result. The code for this week's training. So the link to the registration form to register your code is in the description of this live stream. It's labeled I think it's just called the training registration form. So this week's code is TNT4P, Tango November Tango for Papa. It's valid from 47 minutes ago today until 1 minute to midnight UK time on the 27th of November, which is exactly 4 weeks and 2 hours and 12 minutes from today. Anybody who needs to apply for an exemption from this training, so if you've either can't watch the training or you can't watch further trainings due to anything, personal reasons, work commitments, anything, we don't want to put that extra pressure on you, so please just get in touch with us and we'll try and sort something out with you. We're happy to help. Likewise, if you're struggling or feel like you can't follow these in English because of my horrific English language itself, as many people tell me, then please just let us know that you need to wait for a translation to come out. We have all our translators currently working on getting the rulebook out in the different languages. So once they finish that, they're going to start going over as many trainings as they possibly can. And then once that translation is out, we can let you know, and then we can give you a separate validity period for you, so that you don't, so that A, you can catch up with the trainings, B, it means you'll keep your eligibility to go to do those recertification tests at the next cycle, as well as alleviating that pressure from you if you can't follow in English. So, moving on, last few little bits now. Suspended game. The rulebook says, so there's been a few additions into the reasons why a game may be suspended, but generally it's just reasons that people already have been using to suspend a game. So the main change I've highlighted in yellow is, as well as recording the current game time score, players in the penalty box, and the remaining penalty time, you also now need to take note of which team is in possession of which game ball, and that accounts for all the game balls other than the snitch. So hopefully, I'd say about 7 times out of 10, the balls are going to be held, but loose balls, other than the snitch obviously, shall be assigned to the teams based on which team the head referee reasonably believes would have next possessed them. So if there's a loose ball on the floor, whichever team the head referee thinks will get that ball next is the team that it will go with. So they'll generally assign the ball based on the closest eligible player without a ball. So if there's a beater standing right over a bludger with that and they're not holding a ball, that will be the next player, same with the chaser and the quaffle. But if there is a ball clearly guarded by an arm beater, so if the quaffle's under the legs of an arm beater, even though there might be an eligible chaser for the opposite team right next to them, the likelihood is they're not going to get that ball, so it will go to the team who's guarding it with the bludger. However, the beater's position cannot be used to assign more than one ball. So if there's a quaffle and a bludger on the ground, you cannot use that to decide them both. You only use it to decide one. No more than 2 bludgers may be assigned to one team. So if one team has bludger control and there's the third bludger's stationed between them right at their feet, even though it would be reasonable to assume that they would be the next ones who would get that bludger, you have to assign one bludger to the other team, as well as even if both beaters on one team are in the penalty box. If you've got both beaters in the penalty box, they still get assigned one bludger, which will get put next to their hoops. So the guidance on this is try not to overcomplicate who gets which ball. Most of the time it will be obvious, but in the cases where it isn't, don't overthink it. Just go with a complete common sense approach and ensure that you can give it justification. If there's an arm beater standing over the quaffle, don't say, oh, I think you could have missed that beat, so I'm going to give it to this team. Just say, reasonably, the likelihood is you're going to make that beat, so it's going to go to the other team. So, like with a lot of things refereeing, don't overcomplicate it. Ensure you can justify it and go with a common sense approach. The game will then get restarted with all the players in their respective keeper zones, and the normal restart signal of one short blast of the whistle. If you step outside of the keeper zone before the game is restarted, it is still subject to the false start penalty, which would be a blue card. So moving on to the last 2 slides, the snitch catch. The rulebook says this is a slight change now. So what that phrase from the rulebook basically means is that the third bludger interference now negates a snitch catch and a goal in the same way that a penalty card would. So before, when a blue card or a yellow card or a red card would stop a snitch catch or a goal from becoming good for that team, third bludger interference now also would trigger that negation. And the final slide is just a very short section that has now been deleted from the rulebook, which is declining a catch. Teams no longer have the right to decline their own catch, as a catch to lose scenario is now going to overtime. So even if they don't want to go to overtime, they wanted to catch for the win, doesn't matter, the game will still go to overtime. So that brings us to the end of the changes part 1. I hope you found sorry, I pressed my push to mute button, so while my voice was not transmitting, I didn't know why until I pressed the button again. If anybody has any questions, please throw them into the live chat now, as in 7 minutes time MCP will be rounding up his duty and leaving the live stream. I hope you found it informative. If you have any further questions, as you either go back to rewatch this or don't want to put it in the live chat now, I'm going to post a link to the question and answer form to this specific session in the IQA Match Officials page on Facebook. If you're not part of that, please send us an email at gameplay@iqasport.org so that we can take your input from questions and answer them in a future live stream. If you subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, it will mean that you'll get alerted to further live streams. We will try and ensure that the live stream to be things will come up. So if we've got a live stream, say for next Wednesday, with a few days notice, we'll try and get it saying YouTube to tell you, right, there's going to be an IQA Referees Q&A live stream in 2 days time at this time on this channel. We're also going to try and change the times that we do live streams so that it gives every region a chance to catch a good live stream. So tonight on a Friday night, it probably preferred Europe, America, and Australians waking up in the morning, whereas Asia and the Middle East, it's the early hours of the morning, so they wouldn't have had the chance to catch this one live, I'd imagine. So we are going to try and change it around just to make it fair on everyone. Yeah, we hope you found it informative. Any questions or problems, please email us. I think the email's in the description. No, it's not. But it is gameplay at iqasport.org. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to put that training code into the registration form, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Halloween